Welcome to the Icario podcast with your hosts, Oliver Cowlishaw, myself, and the man himself.
And Shane Milach. And this is the second part of our How to Get Your Shit Together series. So in part one, we talked about your physical fitness and health. And today we're going to talk about emotions. So just a quick recap, the How to Get Your Shit Together series. The idea here is, okay, how do you improve your life overall? Where do you start? And this series is basically the answer of where you start. And one aspect we're taking into account here is for each of the dimensions we're going to talk about, which is physical, emotional, mental, social, financial, and then virtue and meaning, we're going to talk about the top 3 most effective things to do. And by most effective, what I really mean is highest leverage. So what are the 3 things you can do that are like the easiest, most convenient, least difficult, least time-consuming, lowest effort things that will make the biggest difference in this area of your life? So today, emotions. The reason we're talking about this is because, well, a lot of people are weighed down by a lot of emotional baggage. That's basically normal, right? It's basically normal that everyone has some history with their family or with things they've experienced in school or at work or in the past in some way they've basically accrued all this emotional baggage. And this is a cause of a lot of suffering. And it's also something, so in general, right, it's like if you can have a way to process emotions and emotional baggage, that is something that can kind of give you an internal freedom, right? You can free yourself from these demons, essentially. And so that obviously upgrades your quality of life. But also, the more you are weighed down by this emotional baggage, the less effective you are at anything else, right? It's kind of something that, one of the ways I think of this is it takes up a lot of your bandwidth, or it can take up a lot of your bandwidth. And an example of that in my own life was that I noticed at one point in my life, I still remember that I was in Bulgaria. I was walking along the beach, and I was just on a walk, and I noticed that there was just no negative chatter in my head. And it's not that was the point at which like my negative internal monologue stopped, but it's just the first time that I noticed, oh, hold on. It's now normal for me that if I'm alone with my thoughts, there's no negative self-talk. Whereas a few years earlier, it would have been normal to have an absolute barrage of negative self-talk in my mind. And the thing is, that takes up bandwidth, right? It's like while my brain is doing that, it's not doing something else. It's not coming up with creative ideas. It's not, it's not experiencing peace or calm. It's just not doing anything else. It's just this constant background noise of all the things I don't like about myself and kind of punishing myself.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I think out of the 4 people listening to this podcast, I can just almost hear one of them saying, right, that is desirable. How the hell did you reach that state?
Yeah.
And yeah, how do I get there? And another thing I just wanted to say, just to add on to that, is it's very possible that this negative self-talk could sort of lead you down a path that is unnecessary. So say if you've got a negative self-talk pattern of saying, like measuring your self-worth in terms of, say, how much money you earn, for example. And that could easily just be a pattern that developed due to some sort of conditioning from when you were younger, or some moment when you saw something on TV and you associated that with being valuable as a person, etc. And that could lead you down a long, arduous, and ultimately unnecessary path of trying to sort of validate your worth in terms of your finances, when in actual fact, at the root of it, this is just a very basic emotional thing that can be dealt with in ways that don't involve becoming a multi-millionaire.
Yeah.
So for me, it seems this is super foundational. And managing this stuff and becoming super self-aware about your emotions it can save you a great deal of unnecessary time and effort.
Yeah, 100%. And I also want to mention at this point, I just want to make it clear that this is something one of the reasons this is a topic that is near and dear to me is because I had a lot of this. For me, basically, the short story is that for me, the experience of going to school was deeply traumatic for me. And it was because as soon as I think I was a fairly happy child before then, as soon as I went to school, like everything went wrong in my life essentially. And now that I look back on it, one of the reasons was that my teacher was a bit of a psycho, which obviously I had nothing to compare it to. So I didn't realize, but that certainly didn't help. But also, I was one of the unpopular kids. I was bad at sports. I got bad grades. I never had a girlfriend. I was always lusting after or pining after some girl. I never got a girlfriend. Basically everything that can go wrong in the context of school, everything that would matter. Oh, are you one of the cool kids? Are you good at football? Or are you all of it negative, right? It was just all bad. And this is really traumatizing for me. Also, it is clear that, had I been in school a bit later, I'm sure I would have been diagnosed with ADHD, because I definitely had that problem. I couldn't sit still, couldn't pay attention, and so on and so forth. And lots of other things. Like looking back, I was like, oh, I can see I can see why this went wrong,
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, as a 7-year-old in first year in school at 7, it was just confusing. Suddenly, everything's bad. Suddenly, I'm disappointing everyone. I don't fit in, and everything that matters, I'm bad at. And yeah, this caused a lot of suffering for me. And so I've had then a long experience of kind of trying to claw myself out of that. I also have a tendency towards depression, which again, the first time I was depressed should have been in my teens. So after several years of this kind of school-based trauma. And there also, like I mentioned before, from a relatively young age, I was interested in girls and they were never interested in me. And then in my early teens, that was kind of an added problem on top of everything else, and I fell into what was basically a pretty long depression. But at the time, I didn't know what depression was. Nobody diagnosed me with this. I was, I'd just been kind of miserable before. Now I was even more miserable. And I just lived with that. And yeah, it's just all this stuff kind of accumulated during this time that I had to then claw my way out of. And I'm happy to report that over the years since then, I'm happy to say that I did reach a point, I did reach like that kind of rock bottom point at a relatively early age in my life where I was just like, I cannot put up with this anymore. Something has to change. And I started exploring ways of dealing with these problems I was experiencing. And over the many, many years since then, I'm happy to say that I have developed a wide array of tools, and I have overcome many of them. I wouldn't say that I've overcome every single emotional issue I've ever had, but like the vast majority of them, right? There's loads and loads of stuff that used to plague me that I can now say is just completely taken care of. And the difference that this makes to life quality is just hard to overstate. Like you said before, right? I mean, this is just one aspect. Like imagine just having absolutely no negative self-talk ever. And this is possible. And this is, that's what my reality is like now. And it comes from a place where negative self-talk was incessant. And so it is possible to make that transformation. It is a huge upgrade to your life quality. And I'm, very interested in passing that on to as many people as possible.
Yeah, 100%. And just to say, so I've coached a fair few men, like a life coaching thing on the side sort of thing. And it's interesting that you say this because there's a few times when I'll be inquiring as to what they're trying to achieve, like what the goals are. And sometimes it'd be something that's quite easy to quantify, something external, some like career thing, whatever. But more than once, it's come up that a person has responded to something I've said in the video, and it's been something about, I want to be able to sit in a room on my own, unstimulated, and feel okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've mentioned that in some of my videos. I'm like, okay, well, try that out. Just sit and don't do anything and see what comes up for you. And a lot of these people would be like, yeah, well, when I do that, I just feel, I feel shit. I feel terrible. I feel all this stuff just comes up, and I'd rather distract myself from that because who the hell wants to deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the dread of what comes up when you give yourself some rest. Yeah, I think that's a lot of people suffer from that, and it's I think extra difficult to deal with it now because there's always something stimulating available. So it's always easy to look the other way. So let's get into the top 3 things to do for this. And the first thing is introspective writing. So it is using writing, and you can think of this like a journaling style of writing. So writing that is only for you, right? It's not writing for anyone else. It's not writing to be published or to be read by anyone else. It's writing for you. And it's writing as a way of processing thoughts and emotions. And what you just said about, right, the dread of if I'm just sitting in my room by myself alone with my thoughts, I don't like what comes up. And the response is, because that's unpleasant, I don't want to confront that. I want to look away. And unfortunately, that does not solve the problem. If anything, it makes the problem worse. And so one of the things we can do is we can use writing to shine a light on the things we're trying to avoid. And so there's a funny thing that happens with this, because one way to think about this is that sometimes all you need to do is become aware of what's going on. And what happens to a lot of us is that we have this feeling of dragging this huge backpack of emotional baggage, right? And it's huge and it's heavy and it's weighing us down all the time. And we don't dare look at it. And it's followed us for our whole lives, or as long as we can remember. And sometimes all you need to do for some aspects of this, all you need to do is actually look, and then you'll see that this backpack is a kid-sized backpack. This is not an adult-sized backpack. This is a tiny little kid's backpack with emotional trauma that was difficult for you to carry and process as a 7-year-old. But now it's actually not a big deal anymore. Sometimes all you need is to take a look at what is actually going on for things to start resolving themselves. Because there are things that you are still... So again, with my experience of school, so like being mocked and bullied in school, if you take a look at this from an adult's perspective, from present Shane's perspective, yes, at the time, these kids calling me names and stuff hurt me. But now it's just a bunch of kids making up silly names. This is extremely unthreatening, right?
So I was thinking then, if you can imagine all those kids, if they were here, just telling you the same names.
Yeah. It'd be adorable.
How fun. Yeah, but also how funny would it be if it shocked you and you're like, actually, how dare they?
Exactly. Right. And so that's one of the things you can do in writing. You can examine, what is this thing? What is this thing that bothers me so much? Where does this come from? And you can get to that was, it's these kids that called me names and it made me feel unloved and rejected and stuff. And I can have, from my perspective, I can very easily have compassion, both for little Shane in that situation, as well as for these other kids. I'm not mad at them,
As an adult, they literally don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They don't know the full extent of what they're doing. They're just reacting.
Yeah. And that is one of the things. So that's what I mean, where you can use writing to shine a light on something like that and realize hold on, this is what actually happened. And you can come to a level of understanding of this that makes the issue resolve itself.
Yeah. And just to sort of further that point, without writing, there would be throughout my life, there would be many emotions that even today I would have a negative relationship with if I hadn't have wrote about them. So there was an example, an old boss I used to have, I basically used to have a relationship with him, which was very difficult, very toxic. And his presence in my life would trigger some deep, deep anger and resentment and bordering on rage. But I was people pleasing at the time, so I didn't externalize it to anyone. So it became inwardly directed, which is where it would manifest as depression or something. But then I remember distinctly, I'd had a discussion with him that left me feeling horrific. I was like, right, okay, this needs to be written out. So I set a journal, I opened the journal, got home, opened the journal, got a pen, and I said to myself, right, I'm going to write down whatever comes up. I'm going to write down Like this emotion that I'm feeling, I'm going to give it a voice. Like I'm not going to avoid it. I'm not going to judge it. I'm going to let this thing, this emotion within me, have complete expression. And the things that I wrote were, to be honest, quite scary. But after 3 or 4 pages of just manic note taking and images and drawings and just the craziest stuff, I felt relieved because I had actually given something that I previously deemed to be threatening a voice.
Yeah.
And I saw that this thing was it was a part of me from a while ago that felt essentially powerless, because I didn't necessarily get bullied, but I had some dodgy experiences in school myself that were related around me essentially like not being courageous enough to speak out and stick up for myself. So when I'm in a situation where I'm feeling like someone's overbearing and has power over me and I don't stick up for myself, it's more like inwardly directed anger towards myself. And I recognize that. I wasn't angry at him. I was angry at what this situation represented. I was like, here is yet another situation where someone is using power over me and I haven't got the balls to speak out and stick up for myself. And I would never have realized that if I'd have not written that in a journal. That would have just manifested itself as depression. And I don't know, I honestly have no idea where I'd be without that practice. And it's amazing to me that we're using this and we're putting this forward as a solution for people, because there are people out there who are experiencing things that are more intense than what I experience, but have no idea how to handle this at all.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. And it's so what you described there as well is that you're basically using writing to externalize thoughts and feelings in a way that if you just think about them, even if you sat down and thought about it, like deliberately, which is most people don't do that either, right? But even if you just try to do it in your mind, it would be too vague, right? It would remain vague and threatening. But it's almost like once you write, so you have a thought or an emotion or something, you write it out. It's almost like that clears a little bit of the fog and you see the next thing, and you write that and that clears a bit of the fog and you see the next thing. And eventually, and I've had writing sessions like that as well, where it's just like it's pouring out of me until eventually it's like all externalized and it's like, okay, this is no longer in me now. And I can finally see a clearer picture here. So it is a tool, writing is a tool for externalizing thoughts and externalizing and deconstructing emotions. And kind of defanging them, because instead of just this vague, fuzzy feeling, you can really kind of take it apart, and it helps you develop greater awareness, which is the first step in a lot of self-improvement. Is you have to be aware of what's even going on, right? But also the goal here, and I'm going to give a simple framework for this in a moment, but the goal is essentially to not just express this stuff, but get to a next step, get to the point where you can say, okay, here's the fix, here's the solution, but here's the next step, the next thing I can try, something I can do differently. Because we don't want to be just like raging on paper, which you could also do. It can also be kind of self-indulging to express your anger and outrage and so on. But unless you connect it to, okay, now what do I do? How do I change? What's the next step? You can stay stuck there, which isn't very useful either. So a writing session, so these introspective writing sessions, they can look very different depending on what you're working on. But I want to provide a framework as a starting point. And you shouldn't feel like you have to stick to this framework all the time, but this is a starting point. The trigger to start a writing session is usually some conflict, some problem, something that is emotionally agitating. You go, okay, this thing happened. I got angry or I got sad or whatever. And I want to process that. That is what you want to make your writing session about. And the first thing is to, again, think of it as like shining a light on exactly what happened. Exactly what happened, in what order. Like, this happened, it made me feel like this. Try to take that apart in as much detail as you can. Because clarity really helps. And then you can ask yourself the question, what story am I telling myself about this? So there's something inside you that initially it seems like the truth. the truth about this situation is XYZ. But actually, that's a story that you're telling yourself, and you're believing it because it's coming from inside yourself, which is, kind of a basic mistake that we tend to make. It's like, oh, it's not, the voice inside me suggests that this must be a good idea,
We believe everything we think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can ask yourself, what is the story that I'm telling myself about this? And then you can ask yourself, what could an alternative story be? What else could be true about this? And that's a really good practice to start realizing that the first thing that you think of is not necessarily true. Because you don't have to know exactly what the truth is. Often you can't. But it's enough to realize that, oh, the story that I tell myself sounds plausible, and that's why I believed it was true. But actually, there are other stories that are possible that are equally plausible. So how can I know whether I'm actually right about this?
So that's reducing your attachment to an emotionally triggering story.
Yeah.
And that's cultivating a sense of objectivity towards your thoughts and your emotions.
Yes. And then the third component here is to ask yourself, how would you like to think, act, or feel differently in the future in a similar situation? And what would a possible step towards that be? So, in other words, in the context of this situation, of what happened here, what would I like to change about myself? Not about other people, not about the situation. What would I like to change about myself, my own reaction? And how might I do that? And here's the same thing. You don't have to find the correct answer, the right solution. You have to find one thing that's worth trying. That's all. And so let me give you a specific example of how this could be applied, right? This framework we just walked through. So let's say I'm hanging out with some friends and someone makes a joke that's directed at me that hurts my feelings. For some reason, I feel like this is really rude or whatever. It hurts my feelings and I retreat, right? As a result, I don't respond to that, but I'm just like, I don't participate in the group anymore, and I'm kind of a bit grumpy. And then none of my other friends seem to react to this. And so then I'm really upset because I'm like, why aren't you standing up for me? What's going on, right? I thought you were my friends. And I feel like betrayed and abandoned. And this could become a real spiral, depending on how long this goes on. I might be sitting there like stewing in these negative emotions because of what happened, right? So, okay, that would be my trigger. I go home and I go, well, this was horrible. What do I make of this, right? I want to write about this. So the first thing I'll do is write about exactly what happened. So exactly what was said to me. As exactly as possible, the words that were said. And what happened just before? What happened right afterwards? What was my first response? I try to really paint that scenario until I can say, okay, this is as accurate as possible a representation of what happened. Both what happened externally, so people, this person said that person said that, whatever. But also internally, I felt like this, I did that, And then, okay, what's the story I'm telling myself? The story I'm telling myself is that you made a rude joke about me that attacked me personally, and you knew that, and you must have known that this hurts me, and everybody else must have known that this hurts me, and you don't care. It's like, you don't like me, that's why you hurt me. And all of you don't care about me, that's why you didn't defend me. That's the story I'm telling myself.
Right. So you've got the truth of the situation, and those are the objective facts, what actually happened, that is not dependent upon a story at all. That's just, this is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And the second part is, what's the story I'm telling myself?
Or my interpretation of those objective facts.
And it's important to not let the two bleed over.
Yeah.
Because when you're emotionally triggered and you start writing, it might be easy to say, what's the truth? These people are taking advantage of me. And it's like, story. It's like, this person said this. Fact.
Yeah.
But this person's taking advantage of me. They're trying to do this, like, that story. So it's important to not let the two bleed over.
Exactly. And by the way, this is also a matter of practice. In the beginning, you might be having trouble keeping those apart, but trust that the more you do this, the easier you'll find making that distinction. And so that's the story I'm telling myself. And then I can ask myself, well, what are other possible stories here? I can say, hold on, well, the person who made this joke about me is kind of a jokester anyway, constantly takes jabs at people and stuff. And maybe I realize that, you know what? When he makes a joke about someone else, I just laugh about it, you know? So maybe it's possible, or when he makes a joke about someone else, I don't think he's being malicious. I think he's being funny. So maybe it's possible that he was just making a joke because that's what he does all the time. And he didn't realize that this hurt my feelings. And maybe it's possible that nobody else realized either, right? Or even if they realized that something was off, look, it's possible that someone is there and goes, I don't care about Jane that much. I'm not going to do anything. It's also possible that they go, oh, I can see that there's something tense going on here, but what am I going to do? You know, like I'm too shy. I'm not, I feel like it's not my place to do something, right? It's like maybe they're sitting there being worried about me, but because of the social situation, they're just like, I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah.
It's like, how would I know, right? That's what I mean by that story is no less plausible than the one I told myself. So the story that says nobody cares about me, that's possible. The story that says people actually care about me and they just don't know how to handle it, that's also possible. The story that says people care about me, they didn't even realize I was hurt, that's also possible. How would I know? I can't know what their inner world is, right? So, and that can diffuse the whole thing where it's like, oh crap, actually, I don't know what happened here. You know, there's a lot of details in this story that I actually don't realize. But then the next question is, well, what do I want to do differently? And again, important, like, what do I want to do differently? It's no use to say, well, I want people not to make jokes like that about me. Well, you can't do that.
You can't control that.
Yeah, exactly. So it has to be, well, like, what is in my control? And I can say, look, the kind of person I would like to be is two things. One, I would like to not be easily offended. If someone makes a joke about someone else and I think that's funny, but they didn't make a joke about me and I think that's not funny, I don't want to be that person. Okay. So that's one thing I can think, well, can I see like the light side of it, even if it's about me? Can I try to find humor before I find offense, you know? But the other thing is, I want to be someone who has clear boundaries. Like, okay, if you say something that offends me, then I don't want to be someone who just sits there and stews. I want to be someone who says, hey, that actually, I find that really hurtful. Because I would rather have that kind of relationship with people. And I would rather that not ruin the evening, you know? I would rather be like, hey, listen, I'm sorry. I know you're trying to be funny, but that's really fucking hurtful. Don't say that. And most likely, the other person's going to be like, oh, sorry, I had no idea. And then like 5 minutes later, everything's going to be fine. Instead of me sitting there stewing in my misery for 3 hours, right? That's who I'd like to be. And so then I can think about, well, okay, next time something like this happens, what could I try to do? You know, and I can maybe say, okay, if this happens, what I want to do is I want to find an opportunity, maybe a private moment, you know, maybe I don't want to call them out on the spot. That seems too uncomfortable. Just find a private moment to tell that person, hey, listen, you know, that hurt my feelings. Please don't do that. And I can try that out. Maybe it's not going to work. Maybe that's not the solution, but it gives me something. It gives me something to aim for. And this kind of process, if you do that, if you make a routine of doing that, of trying to essentially find the things that bother you, find your emotional baggage, or basically when you get triggered like that emotionally, that's a signal of something that's unresolved, right?
Yeah.
So you can say, okay, what's going on here? Why does this hurt me? What happened here? And make a habit out of going through this process in writing. And over time, that's immensely powerful. Like, this is a personal change tool that's immensely powerful.
So what this does in my mind, this first of all, this cultivates awareness. And when it comes to matters of emotion and thinking, it's as you said earlier, I've noticed within myself that sometimes awareness is actually, I've found to be all you need in certain situations.
Yeah.
But awareness for pretty much any change on this level is an absolute prerequisite. Because without awareness, you'll just be the prisoner of habit.
Exactly.
And without awareness, you won't know what's going on fully, and you won't be able to make the conscious decision to do something differently. So this builds awareness. It also cultivates the muscle of objectivity. And I say muscle because this is something that every time you distance yourself from your own story, you strengthen the muscle of doing that. So builds awareness, cultivates objectivity. And the third thing, which I really like, is it's proactive in that it encourages you to empower yourself by thinking of what can I do differently next time this comes up. Mm-hmm. So this is where the continuous improvement comes in. Because the one thing I said, when I said earlier about the just basically brain dumping or emotionally venting in a journal can be very useful, but it doesn't lack what that process lacks is the proactive, if this happens again, what will I do differently kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I really like this process because it seems to have all the parts to it.
Yeah. And another aspect of this is that it's one of those things, look, when you do this, you might have like a dramatic writing session where you're like, oh my God, what a breakthrough. But you might not. But that's fine. This is one of those things that the difference this can make to your life on the span of like 5 to 10 years cannot be overstated. This is not a quick fix necessarily. In some cases, it is a quick fix. Sometimes it's like, I took care of this thing that's been plaguing me for months in one writing session. That's nice. That happens sometimes. But even now, so I've been doing this for over a decade. But even now, I sometimes have writing sessions that feel unproductive in the sense that I'm trying to deconstruct something. I'm trying to get to this kind of insight. Okay, here's this kind of feeling of resolution. But I don't. I still have sessions where I'm like, okay, I tried. It seems like this went nowhere, and that's okay. And I have writing sessions that are dramatic, where in a single writing session, it makes a huge difference. But the point is that I just keep doing it. I keep doing it because on the whole, so if we go back to the idea of no more negative self-talk, this is the kind of thing, like a single writing session is not going to remove your negative self-talk. But this habit of doing this over the course of years is going to do that. So that's introspective writing. One more note about this is this has to be private. You have to be able to write with complete honesty in a way where you're never worried about someone else seeing this. And you can do that by, writing in notebooks and keeping those safe. You can do that by writing in encrypted files. You can also do that by, the most radical version of this is to write on paper and then burn it. And in the beginning, when I was starting this practice, I had trouble being fully honest with myself. And this practice is what helped me. I would write things down and then burn it. So I could be 100% sure nobody's ever going to see this. And that is something that really helped me get to that point where I can be 100% honest with myself in writing. Because that's a prerequisite. If you're writing for an imaginary audience, then you're never going to get close enough to the truth.
Yeah, and just to sort of reiterate that, the way I think about it is there are certain emotions that we're okay feeling certain emotions, and some emotions we have a negative or critical relationship to certain emotions. And if we say, for instance, if we were taught as we grew up to never experience anger, which a lot of people are, anger is inconvenient for parents.
Yeah.
So a parent would be like, "Don't be angry." I've heard this in like supermarkets. Like, what? Stop being angry. Kids angry. It's like, stop being angry. It's like, okay, good idea. Why didn't I think of that? So it's like basically telling a child, your anger is not welcome. Your anger is not okay. So the kid ends up learning that anger is not okay. So I put anger in what I like to call it the shame closet. You've got a bunch of stuff in the shame closet, and this kind of stuff doesn't go away because it festers. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because when it comes to writing in a journal, it has to be private, because there's some emotions that you feel are so shameful that you struggle to even say them to yourself, let alone other people. You struggle to own it around other people and to yourself. So when you start writing it in a journal and you're totally private and this encourages you to be totally honest, that's when you can start bringing some of these things out of the shame closet.
Yeah.
When they can finally stop festering. Because in the shame closet, the more full your shame closet is, these kind of things, they don't go away. They they just puppet your behavior from behind the scenes, but without your conscious awareness of it. These things just happen, like you emotionally react. Like I had a client that used to get terrible, like demonically possessed road rage, but she was like smiley and happy every other time. It's like, right, oh boy, you got some rage in that shame closet, you know? And then I didn't work with her for that long, but if I had done, I would have sort of started to drift into the realm of, okay, who are you really angry at? Because it's not a driver. You don't even know them, you know? But so private write-in allows you to be totally honest, which is so useful.
Shame closet. That's a great term. Yeah. We have all this stuff in the shame closet, and it gets worse the longer we pile stuff in there and try to avoid it, the worse it gets.
Yeah, and I'm not going to take credit for that idea. That's an idea from Brené Brown.
Nice. Okay.
The shame researcher. She's fantastic. So she's
great, yes.
that's her sort of term, is like you put it in the shame closet, it doesn't go anywhere. And shameful stuff, shame, it grows in the darkness.
Yeah. All right, that's introspective writing. That's tool number 1. The second thing is really simple. It's really simple, but I find it just so powerful. This idea stuck with me for a long, long time. I encountered this a long time ago. And that is simply the question of, for any action that a person takes, you can ask yourself, is this motivated by fear or love? And it's initially I was like, this is a strange binary, you know? You're saying that everything is either motivated by fear or by love. Somehow that didn't make intuitive sense to me. But now I see this everywhere. It's such a useful framework to simply think of, is this action motivated by fear or by love? For my own behavior, at least, I have found that I want to be someone who acts from a place of love generally and not from a place of fear. And it's an interesting tool to use for a couple of reasons. And one of them is it can change your behavior, and it can help you understand behavior in some interesting ways. So as an example of this, imagine that you've got a parent and you've got a child. And the child does something really dangerous, you know, runs across the street without looking or plays with fire or something. And the parent responds to this. And here's the thing. Obviously, the parent wants to teach the child not to endanger itself, right? The parent is concerned for the child's safety, and the child has to learn some hard lessons about how to stay alive. But the thing is, you can respond from a place of fear and try to like clamp down and control, and you're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to ever leave my sight, you know, and you're getting punished because of what you did. And that is motivated by fear. That's the fear response of, I want my child to be safe. You did something unsafe, like this clamping down and controlling. Or it can be a love response, which is still, hey, you can't be doing this. This is extremely dangerous. So initially, like on the surface, it might look quite similar. It's like you take the child aside, or, you know, yank them away from running across the street, right? And you have a stern talk with them. But when it's motivated from love, then it's like, listen, you need to learn to take care of yourself. I'm concerned for your safety. And there are these things you need to learn. There's these things you can't be doing. They're just too dangerous. And how can I teach you to do this? How can I empower you to do this? And the result might be the same. It's like, look, there's certain things that you're not allowed to do until you're at least this age or whatever, right? But because of the difference between whether it comes from fear or love, I think with the fear response, the child is much more likely to just want to escape. You know, it's just like, oh, I'm being controlled, I'm being boxed in. So what I need to do is I need to wait until my parents fall asleep and then sneak out and then do the dangerous shit, you know? Whereas if it's motivated from love and it's more like, oh, I understand why you responded that way. I understand that we have a shared goal here. And it's much more likely that the child feels stifled like that and feels a need to kind of do even worse in response, right? And so I think this kind of oversimplified idea of a parent-child relationship, I think, is useful to see that sometimes the difference is quite subtle, you know, because the love response isn't, oh, just do whatever you want. And this is the same in our relationship to ourselves. We can ask ourselves, okay, you know, for example, I want to improve, or even I'm disappointed with my performance. I wanted to reach some kind of a goal. I didn't reach that goal. I want to do better. But what does the fear response look like? And what does the love response look like? Because the fear response is probably like self-flagellating, right? Oh, I'm such a loser, I'm the worst, etc., etc. And trying to be like stricter with myself, trying to punish myself and so on. And what result does that lead to? Versus a love response that still says, no, I want to do better. I want to grow. I want to improve. But from a nurturing and loving perspective, what would that look like?
Mm-hmm. And this, it's a really interesting idea, this. What are you motivated by, fear or love? And the thing is that a personal experience I have with this is a breakthrough of sorts that came about when I read, there's a book called The Courage to Be Disliked, by two Japanese guys. I'm struggling to remember the authors' names. Fumitake Koga and Ichiro Kishimi did it. Nailed it. And in the book, essentially it elaborates on this idea that are you afraid of being ordinary? And I've never heard it put like that before. It's like a self-help sort of book, but not quite. It's quite different in many ways. But it's like a lot of people, the basic premise is that a lot of people, when they actually say, I want to improve and I want to become better, I want to make a difference in the world and stuff, the authors here kind of call bullshit on that for a lot of people. They say, no, that's not true, is it? Because what you're really scared of, you're not driven by love where you really want to help people. You are driven by a fear of being normal. You're driven by a fear of being ordinary. So now you feel like you have to overcompensate by having this absolutely mind-bogglingly, brilliantly interesting life because actually you're just scared of being normal. So when I read that, I was like, well, damn, that felt like one of these authors had just slapped me across the cheeks because it was so applicable. And it's like, yeah, so was my self-improvement, my self-development efforts, was it based on love or fear? And at the time, after reading that book, it was like totally fear. Yeah. It's like the idea of just being normal and not being extraordinary frightened me to the core. So the idea of you motivated by fear or love, I think it's a powerful question to ask yourself.
Yeah, well, and interestingly, and we'll definitely get back to this on a podcast or on a content piece at a later point, but there's this seeming dilemma in self-improvement where it's like, well, if I'm not unhappy with myself, how can I keep myself improving, right? If I actually fully accepted myself, then I wouldn't make an effort anymore. So it's like I have to be dissatisfied with where I am, otherwise my life will fall apart. And this is one of the most widely mishandled questions in self-development. And the love and fear question is at the core of the solution to this, because there is a fear-based way to the goal. There's a fear-based way to get yourself to go to the gym and get in shape, but there's also a love-based way to do it. But yeah, we'll definitely get into that in a separate episode at one point. One more thing I want to touch on with this love and fear framework is that it can also help develop empathy. Because, so, for example, you were talking about a difficult boss, right? And if you have a difficult relationship with a boss, you have a boss who's constantly being a tyrant and lashing out at people and stuff like that. You can also look at that and ask yourself, well, this behavior, where does this come from? And with that kind of behavior, it's fear. You can see that at the core of this is fear. At the core of this is a person who is afraid and who's desperately grasping onto power and who's afraid of whatever. I'm not entirely sure what they're afraid of. Maybe they're afraid of not being respected. Maybe they're afraid that their business is going to fall apart and they're going to lose everything if they don't run a tight ship or whatever.
Yeah.
But at the core of it, this is a person who is suffering and who is afraid. And that can also change your perspective on other people and things that happen in a way that it suddenly feels less personal. And you can, again, it's also a version of you tell yourself a different story, or you realize that a different story might be true. You think the reason this person is behaving like that is because they're evil. Well, maybe the reason they're behaving like this is because they're afraid. And that can help. That's like a small step towards deeper empathy. All right. With that said, let's get to point number 3, the third tool for like the basics of emotional mastery is gratitude writing, or actually any kind of gratitude practice. But again, in writing, I recommend using writing for this. So gratitude is amazing, basically. Gratitude is a really well studied, like it's scientifically well studied. It's one of the first things that was studied in the field of positive psychology. And there's just been countless studies on this, on the effects of gratitude on happiness, but also on other markers of being a person. And one reason why gratitude is really interesting is because it seems to be possibly out of everything in positive psychology. And by the way, so positive psychology is the discipline, the scientific discipline that examines the positive side of psychology. So rather than mental illness, it looks at mental health. Like, how come extraordinarily happy people are extraordinarily happy? How come people who are really good at being deeply focused or have a great sense of purpose, like what's going on there? It examines that, right? And it seems that from everything I've read about positive psychology anyway, it seems that gratitude is the simplest, highest leverage thing, because it's such a simple thing that in as little as like 5 minutes a week, you can get measurable improvements in people's happiness and satisfaction and social connectedness and so on from doing a simple gratitude practice. But there's also another reason, or there's another thing that makes gratitude seem almost like cartoonishly beneficial, because not only does it make you happier at very low doses, but also it seems to be linked to all kinds of like performance improvement. So there's an author called Sean Aker who has done a lot of work and written several books about his work with basically in the corporate world mainly. And it's like, he goes into a corporation with a team that's a mess, and he teaches them some gratitude and happiness stuff. He makes them all happier, and then they all perform better. And so from some of his work, here's a quick quote from him. He says, people who are happy experience 31% higher productivity, 37% higher sales in sales jobs, 3 times greater creativity, and 23 times fewer fatigue symptoms. Also, happy people are up to 10 times more engaged, 40% more likely to receive a promotion, and 39% more likely to live to the age of 94. So
I'm not convinced.
I'm not. It's not worth it.
It's not worth it. No. For writing 5 minutes a week, who's got that time?
Yeah, and there's loads of others. So, it just seems to touch on so many areas of life. So, for example, there's a study that showed that it seems like people who practice and express gratitude more often also have like just greater measures of like self-esteem and self-worth. So they just, even if the gratitude is always about other things, they are like more confident, more happier, more pleased with themselves for some reason.
That's mysterious, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like better self-esteem if you're grateful for everything but yourself.
Yeah.
It's like, all right.
Yeah. So basically, the point is, it's just amazingly effective. And if you're not doing a gratitude practice right now, start doing it. It's so simple and just so effective. So the simplest approach to this, and where I recommend you start, is just spend like 2 minutes a day writing about something specific that you're grateful for. That's it. So if you have any kind of, if you have like a morning ritual, it's great to place in your morning ritual, grab your gratitude journal and just write down just anything, absolutely anything you're grateful for. And I'm saying 2 minutes because of course I can grab the thing and say, oh, I'm grateful for being alive. But then it's like, okay, if you say, I want to do 2 minutes on this, then I want to tune into that feeling. And it's okay to be grateful for something vague like being alive, but let's spend 2 minutes writing about, why am I grateful for being alive? It's also great to be grateful for something ultra specific. I'm grateful for how friendly the barista at Starbucks was to me today. But you write a bit about that, it's, oh, she smiled at me and whatever, and it just made me feel good. So you spend like 2 minutes like tuning into the actual feeling of gratitude. That's why 2 minutes and not just one sentence. Right?
I mean, what's really interesting about this is that gratitude is so effective that from the baseline state of happiness, even if people did write, I feel grateful to be alive, even if they did that, they'd probably still experience benefit.
Exactly. That's true. I'm already optimizing this. We're already well into optimization here. That's true. So any gratitude at all is already going to do something. But yeah, this is where I would recommend to start. 2 minutes a day, either in the morning or in the evening. Write about something you're grateful for. And that's it. And just see how that makes you feel. Like do that for 30 days or something and see how that makes you feel and if other people notice. It's just so simple. And just also for context, I've been doing gratitude writing for probably something like 15 years now. So this is like one of the earliest self-development habits that I picked up, and I've just never stopped. It's just so good, I've just never stopped. And I think this is also worth mentioning because I'm an experimenter and I love variety. So when you look at my exercise program, I have done all kinds of different exercise programs, different activities. I'm constantly switching it up, right? And the same is true for other things. Meditation, it's on and off. I've been meditating for over a decade. But I'll do mindfulness meditation at one point, then I'll do meta meditation at some other point, and I'll do long meditations, short meditation. I'm constantly mixing everything up. Like the one thing that's just so good that all I've been doing, I've been improving it over time. I've been optimizing it, but I've been doing gratitude writing just forever. It's just so good.
It's that effective. Yeah, I've been doing this, some form of gratitude practice for the last, I'd say about 5 years or so. And I have noticed, the thing is, one thing I've noticed with gratitude is that for me, the improvements were subtle but powerful. Mm-hmm. And it occurred over time where I started to, I don't know, I caught myself just randomly expressing appreciation for someone close to me. And it's like one thing I would never have done before. It's not as if I had the thought and I was like, no, I'm not doing that. It's that the thought just never occurred to me.
Yeah.
But after doing gratitude and practicing it, it's as if you're priming your brain to serve you up these potential gratitude points throughout the day. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's one of the things that I wouldn't remove, especially considering the effort level that goes into it for the benefits. It's like one of the most highly leveraged happiness hacks you could possibly use.
Yeah, exactly. It's really because you start seeing the world in a different way. In a way, gratitude practice, the change you experience is that you live in a world full of things to be grateful for, right? So it changes the world you live in a way that is quite fascinating to experience. So those are how to get your shit together. Emotionally, the top 3 most effective things. Number 1, introspective writing. Number 2, the simple framework of, is this motivated by love or fear? And number 3, gratitude writing. So with that, we have the top 3 things for physical health, and the top 3 things for emotional health. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm already, to me, this is pretty exciting. If someone's listening to this and they do all 6 of these things, that is already pretty fucking exciting. Like the level of difference that can make to someone's life is actually dramatic.
Yeah, and especially because the thing is, it's the people we're talking to. I mean, to make sure that we don't miss anything, we're talking to someone who is following the standard American diet, who's sleeping the average amount and all these things. So you may well be doing some of these things already, but to make sure we don't miss anything, we are casting a wide net here. Yeah. So if there's one person who listens to, say, these first 3 episodes, it's like, oh, I haven't moved in years. Yeah. I don't writing. What's that? How exciting is that? That if they implemented these things in a short time frame, it's like, right, do these things, continuously do them, check back in with me in 2 weeks. I guarantee you're going to be surprised by everything, all the results of this.
That would absolutely be mind-blowing. Although, on that note, I also want to say, I know a lot of people who are really into self-development and have been for a long time who could benefit a lot from doing the things we've talked about so far. So even if you're not like deep in the misery of like you say, like the standard American diet, oh my God, that's like the worst diet in the history of mankind. Even if you're not that bad, you can still benefit a lot from what we're talking about here.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So that is episode 3 of the podcast. Show notes are at icario.com/003. You can also, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can also subscribe to the podcast in your favorite podcatcher thing. There's a Icario channel on YouTube that you can follow for our like personal experiment videos. There's the podcast channel you can follow for the podcast episodes, and there's the Icario podcast clips channel where you can get like bite-sized stuff. You know, if this isn't bite-sized enough already, jeez.
We're extremely busy, is what we're trying to say. We're extremely busy. There's a lot of stuff we're pumping out. It's exciting. So yeah, check it all out. And if you've watched this far, you've seen us fumble our way through this outro. This is like our third episode now. So hopefully these outros are going to get a lot more succinct.
One day we will behave like professional podcasters, but today is not that day.